Okay, thank you. My name is Dag Balkmar, and I'm a researcher and lecturer at Örebro University in Sweden. So many thanks for inviting me to this workshop. Is everything okay? Yeah, you can see it all right. Okay, my background is in gender studies. So I have mainly been studying sort of masculinity and risk-taking in car cultures and stuff like that. So I should say that I've mainly studied autonomous vehicles, transport robots, and so-called smart mobilities as part of interactive research projects on gender and innovation with the Volvo Group, which I've been collaborating with over a number of years. So I should also mention that this talk is based on a collaboration with Ulf Mellström, professor in gender studies at Karlstad University. To meet the mission of the workshop, I will be focusing on masculinity and autonomous vehicles from a socio-cultural perspective primarily. I will also to some degree address methods, or more to the point, I will use autonomous vehicles as in a vein of Donna Haraway as thinking technologies to consider some implications that autonomous vehicles may have in terms of masculinity. As I will discuss, with the advent of more autonomous cars and vehicles, one could anticipate possible changes and emancipatory opportunities with regards to men, masculinities, and automation. So in particular, I will highlight the gendered nuances of an often ignored, but just very powerful themes, such as emotions, risk, masculinity, and technical dexterity, and their positions in current and future mobility paradigms. So two tendencies will constitute the framework of my talk. Firstly, how autonomous vehicles may become a game changer with regards to connections between masculinity, speed, and driving pleasure. And secondly, what new and reconfigured masculinities can we imagine being in the so-called driver's seat in future systems of automobility? So, why focusing on masculinity's emotions and autonomous vehicles, which has been the sort of in the subtitle of my talk? Historically, cars and car culture has been at the heart of our understanding of modernity and what defines the modern world, especially how the car is associated with freedom, speed, and independency. And to a large extent, this has been viewed as a typical masculine enterprise. So cars and car driving is still very gendered. Men tend to use cars more often than women. Men are also overrepresented in traffic accidents, in speeding, risk-taking, drunk driving, street racing, and so forth. So to critically considering how such links are not only gendered, but also changing, it's therefore important. And perhaps even more so today when more energy efficient and safe forms of mobility are called for. So the commonly addressed hindrances for introducing autonomous vehicles, as I'm sure you're much aware of, is user acceptance, social factors, ethical issues, laws, regulations, and insurance issues, and so on. But my concern here lies more with what Laurie and Dan talks about in their article, What We Do While Driving Towards the Driverless Car, namely that the price for autonomous vehicles is that the emotional satisfaction of mastery and control of the vehicle, along with the quest for excitement and pleasure of driving, would be lost. So while contemporary car cultures related to control, risk-taking, and emotions are discussed as being lost with cars programmed to follow traffic regulations, such typically gendered practices are rarely explicitly related to men and masculinities. One exception is Annalena Bertscheid's work on masculinity in the German media on automated driving. So she argues that autonomous cars might be considered a game changer that puts masculinity in danger. Not least when considering control, self-determination, and driving pleasure as key aspects in car driving as a masculine practice, and in constructing cars as symbols of masculinity. So similar to the old transport technologies, these new innovations in the field of automated transport, e-mobility, and smart mobilities. So do emotions and affect play a vital role in the gendering, communicating, and domesticating such mobilities? As I have argued together with Ulf Mellström, we need to take transport affect as a seriously scholarly undertaking with mobility and transport studies. So this implies to see to how people feel and act as a consequence of their emotions experienced within mobility and transport systems. So this is where autonomous vehicles become interesting. These future technologies are imagined to fix many of these gendered problems of contemporary car cultures. When the car is driving itself, human-caused accidents are imagined to be eliminated. However, with the advent of self-driving cars, typically gendered aspects of car cultures will also be lost, namely the so-called driving pleasure associated with risk-taking to give gas and speed. And I will now take two examples of what this thing about driving pleasure may entail for car enthusiasts I've been interviewing for my research on men, masculinity, and risk-taking. So in historical as well as contemporary accounts of automobility, we see that intense emotional expressions have been connected to the use of cars and other forms of vehicles, such as trucks and motorcycles. As such, car cultures have been deeply entrenched in systems of emotionality and embodiment ever since the introduction of this loved as well as hated icon of industrial achievement. So automotive emotions are closely connected to masculine core values such as escapism, risk-taking, masculine prowess, and driving pleasure. And as one of my informants put it after having driven his dream car, he said, "Every millimeter of the car is thought through. It communicates totally with the driver. Every single gear gives the exact amount of torque, even in the way that it's really amazing. It's totally unbelievable. Every part of the car you touch feels absolutely right. When you've experienced this car, once you started driving it, you simply don't want to stop." So this excerpt describes the embodied relationship where emotions are transferred through human bodies and other forms of materiality. The car's responsiveness is described as absolutely right, suggesting the conjoining of human and machine bodies. This particular car is not just a transport device for him, it's fully responsive to the driver, responding to his touch and will in a way that produces an emotional high. Conjoined, the car extends the driver and its powers become his power to control. This particular car's driver's appeal, that you simply don't want to stop, is outlined through an emotional register where the car is referred to as responsive, unbelievable, and seductive. So in the next excerpt, we will meet Janne, an owner of a vintage customized Ford, in which he has installed a so-called nitro oxide system, resulting in much more powerful combustion. For him, the excitement in driving the car, he equals with how the hero of the movie Highlander, which is a fantasy action film on the ages-old battle between immortal warriors, and how he receives extraterrestrial divine power from heaven. So he says, yes, that's how it feels, like reaching for the sky and receiving the force. When you push the nitrous oxide switch, it's like you get it all from heaven. So the speed-based practices that Janne refers to emphasize cars' capacity to extend the self and what the body can feel and perform. In fact, speed makes possible for car modifiers like Janne to produce their cars as sites of corporeal significance, as extensions of self with which to experiment with particular divine states of being. In Janne's case, the car is clearly a site of transcendence, for a short moment feeling as embodying the powers of an immortal Scottish swordsman. While these examples illustrate a strong sense of attraction and sensuality in the design and indeed experiences from driving, the question is, how may emotions and affect come to matter in autonomous mobilities when there are no driver or perhaps no clear defined users to impress? How does the historically powerful connection between masculinity, affect, and transport technologies translate into a new era of smart autonomous mobilities? So as mentioned, part of the material I draw on is generated in collaborated projects with the Volvo Group, focusing on norm-critical innovation. In an So in an early phase of this project, we did a future workshop to imagine how and by whom future autonomous trucks would be used. So when the workshop participants were asked to imagine what drivers would do with the time while trucks are in self-driving mode, the discussions that followed revolved around truckers exercising, cooking food, working on the goods, reading a book, watching a movie, or meeting with other drivers or riders. One particular outcome of the workshops was discussions about new ways of thinking about the cabin as a social space, a space for part of the driver's social lives with friends, pets, even family members to a much greater extent than today. So future truckers, if they exist at all, were imagined to use trucks as their social spaces inhabited by perhaps employed, perhaps not, people who do not necessarily have to comply with the contemporary ideas about the male model drivers, usually an able-bodied man between 30 and 50 years old. So where is the pleasure in autonomous vehicles? Well, the workshop at Volvo seemed to indicate that it is time to pay more attention to the pleasures of being a passenger rather than driving pleasures. In addition, in media representations on autonomous cars and truck technology, words like revolution, fantastic, and excitement is recurring. So excitement in these cases is associated not with the actual driving, but rather with the technology and the changes it is imagined to bring for future societies. Autonomous driving is expected to turn the car into a commodity, a simple, smart, human replacing means to an end. So excitement and pleasures are in this case not associated with actual driving. Here, strong emotions are associated with the technology itself and the changes it is imagined to bring for future transport systems. So to illustrate this point, I will show a short video from Volvo social media channels. So to illustrate the emotional dimension of autonomous vehicles, I will focus the remaining minutes on how Vera, an electrified autonomous transport robot used in logistical nodes to move trucks around, is represented in Volvo's social media channels. Here, emotions are not associated with driving, but with the truck in a much larger context.
A good design needs to fulfill its purpose, and it should be obvious how you're going to use it. And the other aspect is the emotional side of it. It appeals to you, and you really like it. It takes a lot of great minds to come up with something like Vera. The first question that we asked ourselves was, who do we actually design this vehicle for when there is no cab and no driver in the picture anymore? And what we figured out was there will still be human interaction around, and we are actually designing for a greater context, which is the society. So Vera will work with people and for people. When you are working with an idea that's never been done, it's always scary in the beginning. Vera is a very high-tech product, but what does all this technology mean to the people out on the streets? One strength that designers have is to give the technology a meaning, a story. We don't do the technology for its technological sake. Having that in mind, we really try to integrate all this fine technology to the design of the vehicle. The dark parts are representing the technical side of Vera, and it starts with the brain over here. This is where the intelligence lies. This area is the most important part on the vehicle, therefore we decided to put the iron mark and the slash on top of it. The light surfaces are representing the human side of the vehicle. We kept it rather soft and simple, so it feels approachable and not too heavy on the road. Look at the headlamps over here. We came up with this great idea of combining the graphics with the light, so the light appears to shine through the body and create these iconic V-lights. The side surfaces, we kept it rather simple and soft, but we've used some scallops to highlight the backbone. This surface continues to the front and creates these fenders. It appears like a shoulder and giving some confidence to the vehicle. It gives us that trust feeling that it's able to pull those tones behind it. The rear end of Vera is very iconic, and we wanted to create something recognizable instantly. The biggest challenge is to work on an idea that's never been done before. You know that what you're going to create would be the first one and would be looked at. I've seen so many people taking selfies with Vera. To me, that means that we actually managed to give her a soul. It just feels that they acknowledge Vera almost as a person.
Okay, so in the first section of the clip, the camera films the chief designer as he's taking a moment to enjoy Vera from a distance. As he scrutinizes the truck, he explains, it's the emotional side of it. It appeals to you and you really like it. As indicated in the film, its likability and appeal are made key aspects of autonomous transport robots. With no cab and no driver in the picture, the intended uses are less clear. In the film, Vera is depicted as something more than being merely a tool built for transporting goods. Instead, Vera is designed with a broader societal context in mind. These transport robots are intended to populate society and be working with people and for people. As the literature on autonomous vehicles has suggested, part of what predicts trust in autonomous vehicles and the willingness to use them lies in their capacity to produce human-like appearances. For example, Wyatt's and colleagues argues that their test drivers were more likely to trust and enjoy a vehicle that was given a name, gender, and a voice. So Vera is not only anthropomorphized in that sense, as in being given a name and a gender, Vera also resembles something beyond being merely a tool for transportation, namely as an industrial citizen. So the next section of the truck preview elicits this further. Vera is described as with a brain located in the front, where the intelligence lies, and where the Volvo brand iron mark is placed, described as the most important part of the vehicle. So the light gray side panels of the truck represent the human side of the vehicle, described as soft and simple, so it feels approachable and not too heavy on the road. So while this would exemplify typically gender dichotomous narratives, where the brain technological intelligence importance is on the sort of masculine side, with light, soft, human, simple, and approachable on the more feminine side, it is also an example of gender being built into the robot design. So the more typically masculine connotations of conventional trucks are significantly downplayed. There is no driver, no exhaust pipe, no audible engine, no visible engine parts, no dirt. Instead, with the V-shaped lights fully integrated in the truck body, together with the added scallops to highlight the backbone, the truck anticipates a sophisticated, sleek, and smooth design compared to the more angular design of contemporary trucks. However, there are also shoulders integrated into the design to add what is described as confidence to the vehicle and to build the trust feeling that it is able to pull those tones behind it. So with the shoulders added, the design may still emphasize the typically masculine capabilities recognized in contemporary trucks. So in the very last clip of the presentation film, the chief designer gently moves his fingertips over the contours of the truck as he says, I have seen so many people taking selfies with Vera. To me, that means that we actually managed to give her a soul. It just feels that they acknowledge Vera almost as a person. So in the quote, the importance that Vera managed to produce the right emotions in people are emphasized. This robot design and the marketing analyzed here completely put driver-truck relations aside. Instead, the people-truck interface is anticipated to be the future work relations this autonomous truck will be embedded in are emphasized. Even with the driver is completely removed, there seems still to be an anxiety of the truck's loss of masculinity to be considered. which is done by reinstalling typically masculine affordances related to power, muscles, and confidence into the design. So Volvo's vision of future transportation clearly reflects the increasingly intimate cohabiting between human and machine in times of current digital revolutions. So viewed this way, the audiovisual representation of autonomous robots here studied seems less about technology per se, as it is a question of getting the emotional communication right. However, this utopian narrative on future smart mobilities within the freight industry is not about drivers' emotions related to sensations or pains for that matter of being on the move. Future smart transportation nevertheless stresses the importance that new technologies convincingly manage to impress themselves upon people as someone trustworthy. With the ambition to accomplish a truck with the ability to feel approachable, the designers at Volvo not only reinvent dominant gender scripts in trucking, but also emphasize Vera as more than an object of desire and fascination. This is a truck with a soul. So to conclude, in this presentation, I've addressed how autonomous vehicles may become a game changer with regards to the connection between masculinity, cars, and driving, foremost with regards to driving pleasure or risk. I have argued for a closer attention to the place of emotions and affect in changing socio-technical relations, innovations, and design. I have noted some possible implications for men and masculinities. For example, the impossibility for many men and perhaps also women to live out automotive emotions for what constitutes a meaningful masculinity. And with more autonomous vehicles, being the passenger will be normative position. Being a passenger is possibly opening another symbolic realm where the passive and typically feminized subject position can be valorized differently. And the last point I want to make is about what new or reconfigured masculinities can we imagine being in the driver's seat in future systems of automobility. One predicted social impact may be the loss of skilled jobs in the transport sector, likely to be affecting working class men. So we could anticipate that working class masculinity in the transport system would give way to the professional calculating rationality of technical specialists within large scale engineering organizations and social institutions. Instead of trucker masculinities doing the driving, the new drivers will be the coders and software developers working in robotics and software development. With regards to the lack of gender equality in these sectors, as it is today, this is likely to extend some men's control and management of autonomous vehicles while reducing others. Right. So.
Thank you, Dag. It was very sort of, for me at least, very unconventional talk that usually we hear in AI and robotic ethics events, and certainly brought my perspective. I don't have such a feeling regarding cars. I don't even drive. And yeah, it's, thank you very much. So, and please, if anyone has questions, please write in the chat so we're gonna take care of it. Meanwhile, probably while you're thinking of your question, I use my privilege and ask question from you. So while I was listening, I was thinking of this emotion-aware design. To me, is a way to basically to perpetuate gender stereotype to technology. Aren't you a bit worried about that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So, to me, is this emotion-aware design is a way, basically facilitate, you know, we perpetuate the gender stereotype in technology. So, is that something you have thought about it already? Does it make you worried, or what?
You mean that gender stereotypes will be sort of reinscribed?
Yeah, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the gender is always part of designs and so on, I think, more or less. But the interesting thing is that with less focus on the driver and sort of the privilege associated with being the driver, sort of in the active position as it is, then things also change. So and has been kind of very thought-provoking aspect of working together with Volvo on how sort of norms, or very traditional gender norms previously or describing current transport technologies, is much more sort of fluid and less stable. So now, for example, imagining future users is much less clear. I mean, you can't really build future autonomous or electrified or connected vehicles based on what you know today about users. So we have quite a few workshops dealing with that, imagining sort of new categories of users, which definitely sort of challenge gender stereotypes in trucking in very, very interesting ways. So I think we will see much more of that, and that is sort of producers of trucks need to be very, very aware of that, for whom they are producing the trucks.
Thank you. So I think so while people thinking of question, Martin.
Yes, thanks very much for your talk. So my question, so there have been some projects in robotics in our side that are thinking about how to allow autonomous vehicles to also be driven. So you have a setting where you say, now I want to drive. And these projects are in collaboration with insurance companies, and they want to think about how they should charge extra for you to drive. So I think there's also a matter of fairness here, that only rich men will be able to feel these emotions that you have been talking about. So what do you think are the ethical dimensions of this masculinity in autonomous vehicles?
The ethical aspects of it, yeah, well, we haven't really gone into the ethics. So I know this is a huge area, obviously, but obviously it's in terms of masculinity, there will be a shift or not a degendering, but perhaps a regendering when it comes to sort of who will be sort of having more power to set up these systems and construct them. So I'm sure that there's ethical aspects in that, and that's part of my conclusion as well, that the lack of gender equality in many of these sort of male-dominated engineering organizations could also be framed as an ethical aspect. I mean, for whom and by whom is future technology produced? Since it's sort of producing future societies and infrastructure, so it's clearly affecting us all. That also entails ethical issues, I think.